So today we're talking about the Tobii Dynavox pilot, which is the new eye tracking for iPad. We've done 2 webinars already on this. So there's an introductory webinar that really talks about the TD pilot itself, one on neurodegenerative users, and this webinar's focus is on emergent users. So we hope to be able to share with you a bit of our experiences in working with this device with emergent users. All right, so to get started, let's think about who an emergent eye gaze user is. So today's presentation is really about individuals who have never used eye gaze before. They might not yet be symbolic communicators. We might not yet know a lot about their vision. They might have complex needs where we're really not sure what access method is best for them yet. So this is kind of that population of people who, no matter what age they are, haven't experienced using eye control and don't have communication methods at the moment. So these people can be any age, but we're not talking about those that have literacy skills or are symbolic communicators at this point in time. So we're really talking about our very emergent communicators of all ages. So for example, one of my colleagues, Lauren, saw a 4-year-old with cerebral palsy the other day. He is a symbolic communicator. He's able to operate eye control. And so he's not really an emergent communicator. He's moved on through the progression to be using it for full control and for communication. So it doesn't matter what age they are. The thought really is more about their skills. So that's the population we're talking about today. Just to set a bit of a scene about using eye control, particularly for this emergent population, using your eyes to see is really different to using your eyes to control objects. So as part of an emergent user's learning, they're having to learn the cognitive aspect of being able to look at something, to select it and make something happen on the screen. And that's quite different to them just using their vision to watch around the room, for example. We have this balancing act between the cognitive side of using eye control technologies, the cognitive aspect of whatever task you're trying to do. So whether that's playing a game, communicating, going on Facebook, whatever that task is you're trying to do, plus the motor aspect. So to use your eyes to select, you've got to be able to see it, you've got to be able to fix your vision on it to activate the screen. So there's a motor component to this as well. So when we learn to use our eyes to control, we have to think about how we build those skills in our very emergent users. So Tobii Dynavox has the eye gaze pathway. You might have seen different types of pathways around eye control before, but the idea is that we're teaching the motor skill and the cognitive skills of being able to use eye control technologies to do a task on the screen, whether that be a game, communication, learning, etc. So we talk about 6 levels. Screen engagement being that the individual will look towards the screen and make something happen. And that might be just making a xylophone play or something like that. Responding, that they're starting to give more visual attention to the screen and understand that it's their eyes that are making that response happen. We then move to exploring. So the individual starts to understand that if they look at different parts of the screen, whether it's the top, the bottom, the middle, that different things happen and that they can explore and see what kind of responses they get from all over the screen. From there, we move into a skill of targeting. So being able to look at something on the screen and make something happen. And that might be a single target, might be multiple targets. And then we kind of move into choosing where we're selecting and more purposefully using eye control to communicate, complete a game, choose a video, whatever it is. And then we move into full control. So I'm able to use eye control to be able to do the task that I want to do. So we're thinking about this journey along the eye gaze pathway, and we're talking about the users that are really needing our support in learning how to control using their eyes. If this is really new to you, in terms of emergent eye gaze, there's a recorded webinar we did last year, and there's also a workbook that goes alongside it. So I don't have time today to go into all those different levels, but if that's something of interest to you, please jump on and watch that webinar and download the resource. What I want to do today is relate that idea of emergent eye gaze and what the TD pilot offers us. So what's great about the TD pilot is that it now gives us an option for access to the iOS platform on iPad. So it gives us full access to iPad apps, content and services. So what it's doing is using the Assistive Touch inbuilt feature of the iPad, plus the Tobii Dynavox eye tracker to give you access to any apps in the App Store, which can be great for our emergent users if maybe their siblings are potentially playing a game on the iPad and they want to play as well, but they can't operate it with their hands like their siblings can. Maybe it's great if someone's family are all Apple users or their school are Apple users, and we're looking at, well, how can this individual access the same activities and tasks that their peers can? So we're using an iPad as a platform and then using it through eye tracking. And if you want more information on how that's all working, please tune into the intro webinar, the TD pilot. One thing I want to point out specifically for emergent users is just how the interaction works with eye gaze. So often for our emergent users, we're needing a response really quickly back from the screen. So we're building that cognitive cause and effect aspect of I look at the screen and something happens. Often our emergent users also aren't really accurate in targeting on the screen or holding their gaze yet. So this region interaction and assistive touch is really important for us to understand when we're supporting our emergent users. So if we're using a piece of software which is specifically designed for eye gaze, it will use something called region interaction. And if you watch the little green dot, as the user looks around, wherever they look in that red circle, it will snap in to the grid. It will center the target for someone. So that's what we see when we're using something like Tobii Dynavox Snap, when we're using the Grid 3, Communicator, Help Kids Learn, the specific eye gaze type games. That's what it's doing. It's using this region interaction to give users a little bit more support in targeting and accessing that particular icon on the screen. That's one limitation that we do have with the TD pilot, is we don't have as many pieces of software that are specifically designed for eye gaze at this stage. So what we're using is something called assistive touch, where someone has to be much more precise in their movement. So again, if you watch the green dot, as the user looks around, it's kind of going to move and hover on them more. They don't have as big a target area that the software is going to recognize and center for them. So I guess I just want to point that out, because with our emergent users, they're often not targeting really specifically yet, particularly in those first few levels of exploring and responding and engaging with the screen. So just bear this in mind if you're seeing differences between how the user goes, perhaps using one of the either eye gaze devices, the Windows-based ones like iMobile 5 or the iSeries, and look to learn, you might see some differences in what they're able to do, and this could be the reason why. So just to give you a little bit of an overview from an emergent user point of view, how we calibrate. On the TD pilot, there is an app called Copilot that has all your settings in it. So Copilot, really familiar with probably what you know already. If you've used eye gaze, you line someone up, make sure their eyes are in the middle, and the colored bar on the side shows you the distance away. So we want them in the green section. So that's pretty similar to what you know already. You have some options for calibration, either 1, 5, or 9 points, and you still can track both eyes, left or right eye. Where there are some limitations for our emergent users is the stimulus that we can use for calibration. So some of my emergent users, I might need to put a photo of their mum or Peppa Pig or I don't know, Taylor Swift, whatever they're into, I might need to change the stimulus to draw their visual attention. This isn't something that we can do on the TD pilot. So again, just bear this in mind that there are some limitations in terms of the customizability. If you're working with people with cortical vision impairment, for example, and you're thinking, you know what, I need larger targets or I need higher contrast targets, that's currently not something we can do on the TD pilot. So that might influence which device you trial with a user if it's their first go at using eye gaze. So otherwise, yeah, kind of the calibration is similar. We just can't customize as much as you're used to maybe with Grid 3, with the Tobii Dynavox Windows-based eye gaze software. So in terms of learning along the eye gaze, if I come back to this slide about screen engagement, responding, exploring, etc., with the TD pilot and how it works, it doesn't have, I guess, an easy mode where we can just look towards the screen, like hover a mouse over and it works. So for me, I'm finding when I'm using it, the TD pilot is really good for users that have already got to a targeting and dwelling stage of this learning curve. So if you're working with someone who you're not really sure yet and might have fleeting visual attention, you might find that the Windows-based eye gaze devices give you a little bit more flexibility to start. When I jump into the TD pilot and show you, you'll notice that you do need to be able to dwell for at least 0.25 of a second to make things happen on the screen. So that's why I've kind of thought that really in this learning curve, the TD pilot, we need some of those base skills already to make sure our users have every opportunity to learn. So when we're picking games along this learning curve, we need to ask ourselves some questions because there's some pros and cons with using iPad. One of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, does the user have the skill they need to be able to operate those apps? So in the App Store, there's obviously thousands and thousands of apps that people have created. You want to download them and have a look at what you need to be able to operate it. So lots of the apps have a move and drag type feature where you touch it and you have to drag something. Some apps will only have a tap. Some will need you to be able to scroll, a long press, etc. So when you're looking at an app and whether it's suitable for an emergent user, have a think about the skills that they need to be able to operate, because we're going to have to teach them how to do that with eye control and assistive touch. You can think about of course, if the app is motivating, is it high interest? Is it something that's going to be good to practice and build skills? Have a think about if there are any settings that can make it easier. And I'll show you some of those today when we look at some different apps. And can we configure the settings with the app to accommodate the current abilities? So that might be, does the app give us options for larger targets? Does it give us options for modifying response times and things? So that's all something that is built within the individual apps that we need to explore. So I'm going to jump out into the TD pilot and just show you some of the apps I've been playing with that move across this eye gaze learning curve. We are working on a bit of a chart to give you some ideas to get started, and hopefully we'll have that ready soon. So I'm going to just stop this screen and share my TD pilot. So if we're thinking about the learning curve, here we go. If we're thinking about the learning curve, often when we start with our very emergent users, we want something where when they look at the screen, something just happens. So I come off the screen and then when I look, something's going to activate. In this first 3 levels, that's really tricky because we don't have the simplified gaze point type settings and the software like Look to Learn that lets us do that. at the moment. Who knows what will happen in the future, but at the moment, that's really tricky. So possibly what you could do, and it is a little bit fiddly, but if you were thinking about something like a xylophone, which I often put eye gaze users on, you'll see that if I kind of just move, that black dot is my eyes. So if I just move along the screen, nothing's happening. So in something like Look to Learn and specific software, maybe Kinker Games, the inclusive stuff, if I just did that, the xylophone would activate. With assistive touch, it wants me to dwell my gaze. But what I can do is use one of the assistive touch settings called hold and drag. Challenge with this though, is I do have to hold my gaze to start it off. Once I start off hold and gaze, I can move my eyes around. So I kind of need that little bit of skill to start it off, but then I can use it. Then I can use it in a bit more of a, I guess, mouse over screen engagement exploring way. So I guess I'm thinking the way around this for very emergent users is maybe the communication partner needs to dwell and start it off, or maybe we reduce the dwell time right down. That's another way we could do it. So you've got those options for dwell in your settings on the device. So your assistive touch settings are all under accessibility. And, oops, sorry, we scroll down in touch. And these are your assistive, wait for my screen to catch up. You've got your assistive touch settings on. So we click on there. And then as we scroll down right to the bottom, we can change our dwell time. So dwell control, at the moment I've got it on 1 second, but maybe if I'm working with a really emergent user who can't yet dwell yet, perhaps they might be able to do 0.25. So I might set it at that, find another fun app. I found this burp and fart keyboard app. So I don't have to dwell my gaze quite so much. I just have to, it's really quite quick. Well, you're not getting the sound. So you could do that. You can make some accommodations that way. Same with something like a drum. I can dwell my gaze to make it happen. So there are little apps that you can find. One of the drums, and I can kind of dwell, make the symbol go. There are apps you can find, but it's more about the settings. So at some level, they do have to have some dwell, at least for 0.5, okay? So that's an example. If my person can dwell though, I'm just gonna increase my dwell time again, so it's easier for everyone to see. Oops, touch. Okay, if they can dwell, we've got more options in terms of access. Okay, I'll just share it again. So if I'm up to targeting, for example, we can do perhaps games you're familiar with, like the inclusive Help Kids Learn, inclusive technology ones. I quite like this one for targeting. It's called Touch to Jump. So originally designed for obviously touch access targeting, but we can kind of make it work for eye gaze. I'm really stretching my internet here. So what you might want to do is with the settings in different apps, you might want to make it easier for your user. if they're emergent. So this particular app, you could have small or big targets. So I'm going to select big. And I'm going to make it easy.
Easy.
So what I can do, if I can dwell, I can make it move in a targeting type way. But can you see that it's drifting a little bit? So it's not snapping me and locking me onto the monster as I select it. And that's that difference between region interaction and assistive touch. So something to bear in mind for your emergent users. Some other ideas, certainly once you get up to choosing, you might like to use a visual scene type app like Snapscene. This one I've just made hotspots where I can make the animal move, make it go oink, whatever it is. Sorry, the sound's not coming through for you. Maybe I could use something like the GoTalk app to start music. So it's all a bit of experimenting, I think, as to which apps suit your user. So I might be able to do a grid. And then when I select that, I can make that link to the URL and start playing music, those kind of things. Maybe you want to explore literacy type apps or puzzle apps that peers are doing or siblings are doing. Perhaps you want to think about YouTube. Like I found YouTube Kids is a little bit easier. It's not going to let me show you because I'm zooming, but YouTube Kids is a little bit easier to navigate. So you might want to look at that and how you could use it. What else have I had to play with? Tar Heel Reader. Where did that go? I had that the other day. I was having a bit of a play with. The main thing with Tar Heel Reader is, again, doing your settings to give it large targets. Just wait for the computer to catch up on Zoom. So have a look for any accommodations you can make within settings. So in Tar Heel Reader, if I pick this puppies, I can make the targets bigger. So your next and back. And I can just do that in the settings. So you might want to make the page buttons extra large versus the default, which is quite a bit smaller. So when you're using the TD Pilot, we're using apps that aren't really, I guess, they're not designed for eye tracking. So that makes a really big difference, I think, to this emergent group that we're working with. All right, just going to flip back on. Joelle, good question. Pictello, yeah, you could give it a go. Same, you just need that dwell to be able to click on. I think you could do that. You can really use any app as long as the user has the skill to be able to select and target. Okay, I'll just jump back to the slides. So there's lots of different, I'm sure there are lots of different apps people are going to come across and find that work, but it's just bearing in mind what skill they need to do it. So here are some of the pros and cons that I've come up so far when we're thinking about a Windows-based device like the iSeries or the iMobile versus the TD Pilot specifically with these users. So currently with Windows, we have specific eye control games, Look to Learn, Kinker, Inclusive Technologies, etc. Currently for iOS, we have generic apps that are designed for touch access, and we do have some switch control apps as well. So again, keep your eye out of what apps might be best suited. Within Windows, for this emergent user level, I often like to get data of where they're looking on the screen, particularly if they're in those low levels of screen engagement and exploring. So in Windows, you might have used this before, where you get the heat map analysis of where they're looking in Look to Learn. You can use software like Gaze Point, where it will show you where they've selected on the screen. Currently, we can't do this with the TD Pilot iOS platform. So if that's something that you really need for your users, it's something to consider. Like I mentioned before, we can customize calibration in Windows. At the moment, we can't in the iOS platform. They're just little green dots that explode. We've got simplified eye tracking in a lot of the software, so that mouse over, whereas in iOS, we need to be able to dwell for at least 0.25 seconds to operate many of the games, or we need to find a way for us to select that hold and drag type function in Assistive Touch. In Windows, we have options for integrated software. So if you have used Grid 3, Communicator 5 in the past, where you like to set up your homepage where people can go to their communication software, they can launch YouTube from there, you can launch Look to Learn, you can launch Facebook, whatever it is, and it's all integrated in that same software. You can do that in Windows. Within the TD Pilot and the iOS platform, you have separate apps for separate functions. So if I want to use communication, I would need to go to my communication app. Then I would have to go back out to my home screen to select YouTube and back to my home screen to select a different app and game. So it's just a little bit different to maybe what you've been used to setting up in the past for people. They're the ones I've come up with so far, just in terms of differences when you're doing your feature matching and deciding what device might be good to trial. Okay. Oops. So in terms of communication and what's available at the moment, for this emergent population, Tobii Dynavox Snap comes with the TD Pilot and will be on any of the trial devices. So that's really the flagship symbol-based piece of software. There's a couple of webinars on TD Snap if you're not familiar with it. They have done lots of resources for you in terms of using TD Snap with the Pilot. There are a couple of differences that they've added into TD Snap to account for this new move to the Pilot. You can do all your eye gaze settings within TD Snap. So again, change your dwell time. You've got customized gaze feedback in terms of the color of the clock that goes round and things. So you've got those settings still available. You've also got options for calibrating the eye tracker within it and also launching Assistive Touch and iOS from the app. So just worth knowing that they've added a few features to make it easier for those that are using TD Pilot. Within TD Snap, the Assistive Touch menu is a little bit different, and they've kind of customized this based on the mouse functions that those users might need. So scrolling, dwelling, moving the menu, those kinds of things. And you can access the whole iPad through TD Snap, and I'll show you this on my device shortly, so you can have a look at what that looks like. So they have made a few customizations. All right, I'm just going to stop this share and jump back onto my TD Pilot for you, just so you can see. There we go. So TD Pilot is using that centralized region interaction. So you'll notice as I look around the screen, I'm getting that clock and snapping into the grid. So it's kind of more traditional how you're used to using eye gaze. So what they've done Ooh, it's really slow. Sorry, guys. I'll wait for it to catch up. So probably on your screen at the moment, you can see core first and the clock going round to select. And that's that region interaction that it's snapping into the grid. So they've added some extra features within Snap. In your dashboard, there are options now to be able to launch iOS. So a user could do that themselves and they can calibrate and all those kinds of things. Okay. Hasn't really caught up, sorry. Making it do too much. All right, we'll go back, finish off the slides, and then we'll kind of open up to any questions that people have. In terms of support materials, there's lots available for the TD pilot. You'll find that there's information on how we can refine eye tracking. So there's some settings around responsiveness and movement tolerance that you could play with. I think this will be really important for our emergent users as well, to try and get that tracking to be as stable as we can. And yeah, there's lots of really nice documentation on this that you can download from the training cards. So if you're trialing the TD pilot and want this information, just let us know and we can point you in the right direction. So kind of in summary, the TD pilot is not really suitable for our very, very emergent users that we're just wanting screen engagement. So just think about kind of that learning curve, and you might decide that you want to try one of the other Windows-based devices first. And then if you think, oh, yeah, they're targeting and dwelling now, then I'd launch into the TD pilot if they're interested in an Apple-based device. So it does really suit users that can dwell their gaze, they can choose, and they're using the device for communication. Just be aware that iOS games are not designed for eye control yet, so you will need some stronger operational skills than using more specific eye control software. And so really it comes down to matching the features required to your user, and you can match that with the hardware and the software that's available, and that's something that your Link Assistive clinical team member can help you out with. So in terms of eye control, there's still the iMobile devices, the i13 and i16, and then the TD pilot kind of rounds out the eye gaze options now. If you want to access the TD pilot, we can obviously do these product demos over Zoom, in person, with your clients if you'd like us to bring it out and test it out to see if it will work before you sign up for a loan. We offer free 3-week loans for the TD pilot. It's super popular at the moment, so there is a bit of a wait. So you might like to try one of the other devices first and get them on to the TD pilot waitlist as well. We do have options for 3 to 6 month paid rentals as well. If you know that this is the right device, let us know. We can do a quote for you. It really is a dedicated device, hence the price, around $16,695. So you can't just plug in the eye tracker into an existing iPad. It comes all as one unit as a dedicated device. And you've got those links to the product support as well. So on that note, I'm going to